Guys, welcome back to the show. I am your host, Alan Mosley, joined as always by no one this week. I'm actually going to be doing the show solo because Sherry's having some technical difficulties. So I told Sherry that I would let all of you guys know Sherry's plane spun in and there were no survivors. So anyway, get our housekeeping out of the way. Guys, I heard the messages. People were telling me all the time, we want this program as a podcast so we can listen to it while we're whistling while we work. And I don't always have time to physically watch the show. Now, if that applies to you, by the way, there's a website you can go to get information you need. However, we actually have the setup for you now. So thanks to being listed on Anchor FM, which in turn puts us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, a bajillion others. I think iTunes is in the works. So anyway, we're there now. Got the audio podcast back up and running, so you can check it out there. Also, I just want to make sure we give a plug to Odyssey as well. Odyssey is a decentralized platform that is an alternative to YouTube if you're one of those people that's not a big YouTube person. So you can also check us out on Odyssey by looking up Alan Mosley TV or It's Too Late with Alan Mosley. Really, you just can't go wrong if you type in Alan Mosley. But either way, we're there. So something I wanted to talk about to start off, this is, I guess, technically season 2 of the show. So season 1 ended with the episode 150 live special from our studios in Middle Tennessee. And I want to say really quickly about that, thank you so much to everyone who came out, who supported the program, people who traveled from all over the country to be at our little place in Middle Tennessee. Just the camaraderie, getting a chance to visit with so many of you guys is a very special treat for me. And it's something that, it didn't exist a few years ago. A few years ago, before the onset of the gold standard, which then became It's Too Late. I knew only a handful of you guys. A lot of people I only knew from the internet, from social media, had never met in person. And now, fast forward a few years, thanks to the program and thanks to the generosity and support of you guys, and now we do. And now we've gotten to meet in person, and that's a very special thing to me. It's something that people ask me sometimes. You're so cynical, Alan, about politics and the state. If you feel like there's really not much can be done other than maybe a little self-improvement, then why do you do this? Why do you do a show and talk about these current events and issues all the time? And I feel like I've got a simple answer for that now. And it is, we're trying to build a community. And this is our community, and the folks who came to the live show are a part of that community. And I really appreciate you guys. So now that we've got all that mushy stuff out of the way, I wanted to do more entertainment, more fun, more jokes, more funny graphics to kick off season 2. And there'll be plenty of time for that. But unfortunately, I'm actually going to start with a political rant to start the show this week. A lot of people have probably seen in the news that the Biden administration is allegedly talking to business leaders in the United States about a vaccine passport. And what that would be, for people who are hearing this for the first time, is that you would basically be required to get vaccinated, and then you would have some type of certificate or digital, affirmation that you've been vaccinated. And then businesses, but also think airlines, lots of different travel. They would be able to see whether or not you've been vaccinated, and then they would allow you into their businesses. They would allow you onto their airplanes. They would allow you to travel. They would do business with you if you had one of these vaccine passports. And obviously, we're against that. Obviously, here at the show, we're very strongly against that. And there's lots of reasons, philosophically, morally, ethically, principally, to be against that. And other people have already talked about those at great length. But what I really want to focus on is people like us, people who fall outside of the political mainstream, if you will. We maybe specifically above many are people who have to find their line in the sand. you have to, everyone's can be different. Many different people that all have very similar views may have different lines in the sand. And and I understand people who are willing to go a lot further out than say I am, and because they're thinking about their self-preservation, they're thinking about their family, they're thinking about their kids, they're thinking about, well, I'm just going to go along to get along because I don't want to put myself or my loved ones at risk. Which, by the way, that really, even that explanation in of itself really says something about the state, in that the state only knows one thing, and that's coercion and escalation. They don't suffer opposition. But again, that being neither here nor there, we all have our different lines in the sand, and it kind of lends itself to a concept I've been playing around with and something that I'm writing that I hope you guys will get to see here pretty soon. And it's the basis of it is what you can live with versus what you can't live without. And so you start with, what can you live with? Can you live with the nation in which you live? I'm trying not to use terminology like our country, all that we the people BS, because it's not. But can you live with the nation that represents you, being the largest, most expansive government in world history? Can you live with an American empire that breeds untold amounts of death and destruction to people around the world? Um, can you live with the war on drugs and everything that entails, and the problems with the criminal justice system? Can you live with gangs and violence that are largely a product of prohibition? Can you live, and also, by the way, tying that into borders, same difference. Can you live with um, federal overreach on and regulation on every single product and service one can imagine, and licensing, and who really owns what? Do you really own your home if you pay property taxes? Can you live with that? And obviously, a lot of those things for most people, the answer is yeah, I can, because I feel like attempting the alternative is worse than just getting along. And so that's a question we all have to ask, is what can you live with? But, on the other side of that token is what you can't live without. And so talking, kind of turning this in more of a positive direction of, I can't live without this community, all these wonderful people who join me each week and hang out, and people who come down once a year to hang out with me in person. I can't live without my fiance, and seeing her happy, and it frustrates me when she's not happy because of lockdowns and mandates and us not being able to live the life we would like to live. Certainly not happy with the associated lockdowns and mandates that closed our business for a big chunk of last year and hurt us financially, incredibly so. So I can't live without that. I can't live without being able to seek my own good fortune and do the best that I can without having my fate determined for me by people who feel like they have a greater claim to me and mine than I do. Um, but I can't live with those things. I can't live with with my friends and my family, and life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness and all those wonderful things. And so that brings us around full circle to this vaccine passport thing. And I can't live with that. That if you are someone who hadn't reached your point yet, where you had drawn a line in the sand, I implore you to make it this. If there was ever a time for people who largely share similar views but have some nuance and difference of opinion, and sometimes we allow a few differences of opinion to split and fracture what would otherwise be a healthy community into smaller subsects, um, this is a great one for all of those different groups to come together on. This should, if you haven't already drawn it, this should be your line in the sand. Now, we're going to have Michael Boldin of the 10th Amendment Center on later in the show, and this isn't really the main focus of the program, but obviously, you know, they, over there at TAC, they talk a lot about working at the state level, fighting against federal overreach. And I know that some people will say, oh, well, you look at Governor DeSantis in Florida, he's already said, no, we're not going to have vaccine passports, and that's great. If there's anything you can do at a local level, at a state level, to push back, now is the time. And because this, just as with everything with government, this will just be the latest encroachment in a long line of encroachments, and it will just be used to further exacerbate and spread their power and limit your liberties. So if there's anything you can do, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm going to ignore it. And I hope this doesn't mean that I'm in jail and or murdered soon, but I'm not going to get the vaccine. I'm a healthy person who doesn't need it. And I'm not going to carry around a passport with me that's going to tell a business owner I'm allowed to enter that property. If that's how they conduct their business, they won't get a penny from me. Whether you're a vote with your feet kind of person, whether you're an agorist, a voluntarist, you know, if you're a true free marketeer, a capitalist, a libertarian, an anarchist, a conservative, whatever label you apply to yourself, I hope all of us can come together on this being our line in the sand. With that said, we're gonna do our best to have more fun, talk about some lighter topics along with the heavy ones, but either way, try to do it with a little bit of both humor and class. But until then, if you are the type of person who doesn't feel like this is your line in the sand, if you're the type of person that's out there saying, well, we've had vaccine passports before, silly, don't you see the little things you have to travel overseas? Or, well, you know, didn't you get vaccinated for X, Y, and Z when you were a kid? If you believe all those things, then you can visit euthanasia.com to get the information you need to make the right choice. Guys, we'll be right back after this break with the meme of the week and viewer mail. Don't go away. If you're enjoying tonight's show, consider supporting the program by becoming a member of our Patreon. That's over at patreon.com/Alan Mosley. Guys, welcome back to the show. Hey, Alan, what time is it? It's time for the meme of the week. You know what's so great about a meme like this is that you can hear Emperor Palpatine's voice. I'm going to butcher this. Oh, I'm afraid the plastic guns will be quite operational when your bands arrive. And then creepy smile. Fade to Luke. Anyway, we actually are going to be talking about 3D printing and the Second Amendment with Michael Boldin in the next couple of segments. But before we do that, answer some viewer mail. All right, we're going to start this week with Kim Brown, who asks, Dear Alan, if you stick 2 pizza slices together, does it become a sandwich? So that is not a sandwich unless you have something else in the sandwich. So the pizza slices can be your slices of bread, but there still has to be something else in between the 2 slices of pizza for it to be a whole sandwich. Otherwise, it's still just 2 slices of pizza. To add a little bit of evidence to that, some people might remember that I think Kentucky Fried Chicken had the Double Down, which was, it was a like bacon cheese sandwich. but instead of having a bun, like a top and bottom bread, it was 2 chicken fillets. So you had the 2 chicken fillets as your slices of bread, and then you had your bacon and cheese in the middle of that. So that was a sandwich because the 2 pieces of chicken were the bun and you had stuff in the middle. So there you go. And by the way, yes, I did have a double down and it was reprehensible. And by reprehensible, I mean delicious. Lyle Durio asks, Dear Alan, what is the best way to handle a noise complaint with a neighbor? So I have enjoyed. Now, are you talking about they're complaining like they have a noise complaint against you, you're being too noisy? Or are you saying they're being too noisy and you're the one complaining and you don't know how to go about it? So in my mind, I think if you're the one being too noisy and a neighbor knocked on my door and said, hey, you guys are being super noisy, we're trying to sleep or whatever. Now, I mean, I'm a reasonable person and I would probably say, oh, like if I knew that what I was doing was in fact creating more noise than the norm, I would do my best. I would address their concern. Maybe I would try to lower the volume, or maybe I would explain. I would say, hey, we're trying to film an episode of It's Too Late with Alan Mosley over here, and we're going to need another 30 minutes. But at least you've given them some type of expectation. Now, if the opposite is true, if they're filming an episode of It's Too Late with Alan Mosley, and I'm complaining that they're too loud, then, I mean, obviously you call the cops and have them all killed. So, Celeste Annis writes, Dear Alan, soft serve or hard ice cream? Now, here's the thing. I love milkshakes. And the thing about milkshakes is that I don't want to have to wait like an hour to physically be able to drink it. It's not like a Frosty from Wendy's where you just use a spoon. I want to be able to drink it. And so I generally will use ice cream that's not super hard or frozen for that reason. And same difference if I'm eating ice cream, I would rather be able to quite easily like get spoonfuls of ice cream as opposed to like, you know, you get that tub of ice cream out of the freezer that's really been frozen hard and you're like having to get a spoon. Like it's bending your spoon because the ice cream is stronger than the metal. So no thanks to that. Jonathan Kranza writes, Dear Alan, AK or AR? Well, I have to go with AK because those are the initials of the official fiance of It's Too Late. There you go. Andrew Avery writes, Dear Alan, if this were a morning show, would it be It's Too Latte with Alan Mosley? So first of all, I don't even drink coffee, as a matter of fact. I mean, I'm like a chronic insomniac who basically never sleeps. So my problem is falling asleep, not getting up. So I actually don't even drink coffee. And then on top of that, everyone who knows me knows that for me, the morning is about noon. And the night is like 2, 3 a.m. So the chances that I'm going to do a morning, like a traditional morning show is basically about 0%. Jeff Johnson writes, Dear Alan, how has Evergreen blocked your creative flow? So if anything, I actually saw people on Twitter were saying that they wish that the ship would get stuck again because of all the great jokes and memes that were coming out. So one could argue that it actually opened up people's creative flow as opposed to the opposite. Eric Eli writes, Dear Alan, is the crisis at the border a crisis or is it a challenge? Well, you said, is the crisis at the border? So I think by default of your own wording, it's crisis. With that said, I'm going to give a semi-serious answer here in that there are so few genuine like societal concerns that couldn't be addressed. I'm not saying they wouldn't be perfect, but couldn't at least be addressed with a more libertarian or anarchism response. So have a crisis at the border, open the borders. If you're one of these people who says, but I like my socialism for me, I don't want them to have the socialism, well, abolish the welfare state. You can't have it not voluntarily anyway, in our type of society, taxation is theft, so you wouldn't be able to fund it unless it was voluntary. And if it were voluntary, it should go to whoever they wanted to go to. If you're concerned about things like drugs coming across the border, gangs, well, legalize drugs. There you go. See, all these crises all go away. Mike Mahiri writes, Dear Alan, do you think they'll be able to keep Biden propped up for 2 years so Kamala will be able to finish out his term and be eligible for 2 more? So that's actually something we've talked about on the program before. And so we'll do it in pieces. Number one, will they be able to keep Biden propped up for 2 more years? Yes, I actually think Biden's going to finish his whole 4 years. So that Kamala can finish out the term and be eligible for 2 more. So by logic of the first one, not only do I think Kamala will not take over for Biden, she'll never take over for Biden in any logical sense. She will never win an election. She will never become president of the United States. I think that Biden will finish out his term. By the way, the only way Kamala could ever be president of the United States is if she is ascending to the presidency because Biden is unfit during Biden's presidency. She could never win an election. This is an incredibly unliked, unpopular woman, as shown by like the 1% she was polling at during the Democratic primaries. And couldn't happen to a nicer person, by the way. I would refer people to Kamala Cop 2, and Kamala Cop 3, all previous episodes of this program. Clay Davis writes, Dear Alan, in the event you were elected president, who would you name as your primary cabinet members and what roles would they serve? Clay, I actually want you to write me about that question because that's too great and big of a question for us to do as a viewer mail. I'll do like a whole segment on an upcoming episode of the show just addressing that question. I love that question. We'll do a whole segment on that question, but I can't really cover it in great detail for viewer mail because we're kind of running short on time. Suzanne Sherman writes, Dear Alan, what's a better game for a first date? Scrabble or Twister? So for the guys out there, if you are taking a girl out on your first date and you're deciding between whether or not to play Scrabble or Twister, this is why you're single. All right. And we're going to do one more from Andrew Avery, who writes, During Holy Week, should you give a shout out to your peeps? So I'm actually going to answer that question. Yes, but I've actually never had a peep. So the former producer of this program, Blake Osborne, he actually loves Peeps. And when they announced that they were having Peep-flavored Pepsi as like a limited time thing, he was just immediately all over social media saying, does anyone know where I can buy this? I gotta have some Peep-flavored Pepsi. Dude loves Peeps. I'm glad he actually isn't here to hear me say this. I've never had a Peep before. So there you go. You know what? We need to do more like taste testing segments on the show. So if one of you guys out there listening sends me a package of Peeps, you just message me. I'll give you the address. You send me some Peeps, or even better yet, you find me that Peep flavored Pepsi, and we will do a taste test of it live on the show. I think that's it. So with that, we will be back with Michael Boldin of the 10th Amendment Center right after this. Don't go away. Your ad could be playing right now, reaching thousands of potential customers. Sadly, it's not, but it could be. Find out how to be an advertised sponsor for It's Too Late with Alan Mosley. Email us at info@alanmosley.tv. Guys, welcome back to the show. Our guest today is the founder and president of the 10th Amendment Center, which you can find at 10thamendmentcenter.com right there, as well as the host of the very popular Path to Liberty, which, I mean, there's kind of a commercial that plays on this program every single week. So if you haven't heard of Path to Liberty, you also aren't watching the commercials. And if you're not watching the commercials, then you're just not an American. Michael Boldin, welcome to the show.
Oh, Oh,
Yeah.
is this thing on?
Yeah. You're still in
This is
Zoom,
gonna
buddy.
be fun.
Yeah.
Let's do this.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
So so Michael, our theme that we've had over the last few weeks, and we're continuing on for a few more weeks, is Republicans are just the worst. Now, before anyone kind of tries to cut me off at the pass by saying, but Democrats are even worse than Republicans. There'll be plenty of time to bash Democrats later. Right now, we're talking about Republicans. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show to help me talk about this is I am always getting updates from the 10th Amendment Center that's giving me updates on some TAC endorsed and sponsored bills around the country and whether or not they pass, who is helping to pass them, what coalitions are there working on those bills. But there seems to be a very common trend at the state level, and that is Republicans getting in the way of some of these bills. So I want you to talk about that a little bit.
Oh man. Do we have all well, this is the 8-hour
This
edition
is
of the
your
show,
favorite
right?
thing to do, so this is your chance. Go for it, my man.
Let's just roll with it. So, obviously, let's like a little background. Our activism work, we do two things at 10th Amendment Center. Half we do some educational stuff. I run my Path to Liberty podcast. We've got
Mm-hmm.
tons of articles by Mike Meharry and things like that, talking about history and current events and applying it all. And
Sure.
then the other part of our work, which is heavy at this time of year, we call it nullification season, because that's when most state legislatures are in session. And that's when state legislatures are considering bills or legislation, and some of those bills will undermine, pull the rug out, resist, or nullify federal acts, all of which are, we'll say 90 some odd percent of which shouldn't exist under the original legal meaning of the Constitution. So we have hundreds of these things that we monitor, whether it's on surveillance or asset forfeiture or police state, prohibition, whether it's on a plant or on a firearm, and on and on. And so we try to focus on the positive. But what I've noticed, and here's a time, especially on the right to keep and bear arms, where using James Madison's strategy from Federalist 46, that is, a refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union. James Madison told us there were 4 things that needed to be done at a state, local, and individual level to undermine and defeat federal programs. And if multiple states did this strategy, he said, it would create an environment that the federal government would hardly be willing to encounter. His words, not mine. I'm just kind of going with, father the Constitution kind of guy. He probably knows how to defend the thing better than I do. So I'm just kind of reiterating what he had to say. Refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union. Now, this isn't just some archaic kind of strategy from some dead dude. It's also been sanctioned by the Supreme Court from 1842 in 5 major cases going from 1842 all the way to 2018 in something known as the anti-commandeering doctrine. And here the court has repeatedly held over and over and over that the federal government cannot require states to use resources, including person power or any other logistical support, to help implement, effectuate, or enforce federal acts or regulatory programs. So at a time when the new gun grabber in chief replaced the previous one, who actually was on federal gun control, the worst in history. We can cover that if we want to. But the new guy is going to try to make things even worse. Joe Biden, of course, is horrible on the right to keep and bear arms, horrible on the Second Amendment, horrible on just the Constitution and rights and liberty and all that stuff. He's obviously going to try to push through all kinds of new gun control. For example, on ghost guns, or on AR-15s, what they want to call assault rifles, or whatever kind of propaganda term that they use. It should be a no-brainer for red states, we'll say Republican-dominated states, to simply use James Madison's advice, which is using legislative devices to refuse to cooperate with officers of the Union and ban enforcement on a state or a local level of federal gun control. Period. End of story. We know that the ATF has about 5,000 to 6,000 employees. It varies. It's probably around 5,500, give or take. About a third of those are in administration. So my government-run school education math is pretty bad. So what does that leave us with? Like 3,500 enforcement agents for the entire country.
Mm-hmm.
That means they have the capability of closing about 8,000 to 10,000 cases per year. That's a lot. That's 8,000 to 10,000 too many on federal gun control charges. But if you put it this way, let's say there were about 10 or 11 or 12 or 13 million undocumented short-barreled shotguns around the country in violation of the National Firearms Act of 1934, which shouldn't exist. There is absolutely no way that the ATF or the federal government, even as a whole, could do anything about it beyond those 8 to 10,000 cases, especially if the states stop helping. Those 8 to 10,000 go down. Now, we also know that since 1987, the state of Oregon, and then we can talk about 1989, San Francisco, and then many other localities on a state and a local level have used this strategy to ban enforcement of parts of federal immigration law, and they've been really effective. The reason that conservatives hate what are called immigration sanctuary cities is not because they're just snowflakes, at least on this issue. They don't like what they're hearing. They hate it because they have a huge impact on the federal government's ability to enforce federal immigration laws. ICE specifically puts out a report every year called ERO, Enforcement and Removal Operations. And they cite, at least for the last few years, they've specifically cited these sanctuary jurisdictions as being one of the biggest impediments to their ability to fully enforce federal immigration law, to do more enforcement and removal operations. So we know this stuff works, whether you like how it's being applied or not. But at a time when you know that it's been working, you could either spend your time complaining about how they've done it, or you can learn what they've done and apply it on the right to keep and bear arms and say, well, let's not enforce federal gun control. And you would think that the Everytown, whatever that group, Everytown, Bloomberg people, these would be the number one opponents of 15 some odd pieces of legislation in states around the country to ban enforcement of federal gun control, past, present, and future. You think the opponents would be Bloomberg and all those guys, but they don't need to waste their money on this, because the number one opposition to this type of effort, to ending enforcement of federal gun control within the states or within the cities, are law enforcement lobby organizations and their Republican backers who believe that their oath is not to the Constitution, but instead to whatever a law enforcement lobby organization tells them to do. Wyoming may be the greatest example of this currently, where a bill, Senate File 81, was originally filed by a guy named Anthony Bouchard, state senator there. He was the founder of an organization called Wyoming Gun Owners. He got into the legislature and he introduced the Second Amendment Preservation Act to ban enforcement of federal gun control, past, present, and future, in Wyoming. It got passed out of committee, but all 23 sheriffs in the state signed on to a letter telling the Republican-dominated legislature, you can't pass this, because if you do, we won't be able to catch criminals. But I got news for you. If they can't catch criminals without federal gun control, like murder charges or rapists or terrorists, because there's so many terrorists attacking Wyoming, I don't know where we have to be afraid of this, but they're always trying to scare us into some. Remember in V for Vendetta, there's this one scene, we got to remind them why they need us.
Yes.
And that's basically what they're doing all the time with these calls for, like, terrorists are coming to blow us up. I remember when I was a kid, I watched this propaganda film in the 80s talking about how the Russians might nuke, not just a city, but they showed a house in a suburb and they showed it blow up. This might happen to your home, but this is the type of garbage we've heard forever. So all 23 sheriffs in Wyoming signed on to a letter and aggressively lobbied against passage of a Second Amendment Preservation Act, claiming that passing such a thing would only help criminals, drug dealers, rapists, and the like. And so what did they do in the state Senate once they got it there to the full chamber? They amended it from originally being something that would ban enforcement of everything into this weird process. And Mike Meharry did a great report on this. You could probably link to it if you want to, but and I can get that over to you. But basically what they turned it into, rather than you're not allowed to enforce, it becomes now what they passed in the state Senate in Wyoming is, well, if there is a new piece of gun control that comes out from the Biden administration, and 25 Wyoming residents petition the state to take a look at it, then the attorney general is required to issue an opinion on the constitutionality. And then if the attorney general thinks that it's unconstitutional for the federal government to have this new federal gun control, then the governor has to issue his own opinion. And then if the governor, and this is serious, these are all the layers, and then if the governor's opinion agrees with the attorney general, then if he thinks it's in the best interest of the state, then he would say, we're going to stop enforcing that particular act. So there's all this garbage from Republicans that are getting in the way of what should be an absolute no-brainer. Look, we may not be able to get the federal government to stop doing its gun control or expanding on it. We may not be able to get the federal courts. We can't get, let's be real here. The federal government will never limit its own power. It may take a little dip here and there, but in the long term, if you zoom out, it will always continue to grow and grow and grow. And we live under the largest government in the history of the world because people have relied on the federal courts, which are a part of the federal government, to limit federal power. This is just stupid. Dumb strategy. It's a total failure. So as long as that continues, we shouldn't be surprised. But at the same time, like, we may not be able to stop it, but they don't have the manpower or the resources to enforce this stuff. We can see how that plays out with 36 states now defying Washington, D.C.'s total prohibition on a plant, cannabis. So the same type of approach should be used on the right to keep and bear arms. It's another natural right. What we use, what we consume, what we own should never be a crime. And this is a big foundational step forward. And that big foundational step forward is always and most aggressively opposed by law enforcement lobby groups. And then Republicans are just so spineless. They pretend to be strong on the Second Amendment. But if a cop group says, well, we're not going to be able to catch drug dealers unless we are able to get an additional couple of years on them for a federal gun charge, then they're like, well, they're telling us criminals are going to run this state. And I'll tell you, criminals are running these states already. So I don't know. Maybe that's a good overview.
That you've almost burned through the whole first segment, by the way. It's just
like I said, 8 hours, man, and I can do this all day. In South Dakota, they passed in the House a bill to ban enforcement specifically of red flag laws. These are laws where someone is considered an extreme risk, extreme protection order, and so then they're just going to take someone's guns. Think of how they can describe someone as mentally unstable, and then if you give that power to the state, and then the state can use that power, and we're talking state, not necessarily just as in states, but as in government in general, state or federal or local, if you give that power to government, government is going to use that power without a doubt, or someone is going to get in power that wants to use that power and expand on it. So they passed it out of the state House. And then the Republican-dominated Senate. I mean, we're talking about there's only a handful of Democrats there in South Dakota. First, they voted 8-1 to kill it in committee. And then someone who really believed in this, say, we're not going to have red flag laws in South Dakota, well, made a parliamentary move to get it out of committee anyways. And that got voted down twice in the state Senate, like 22-5, 21-5, something like that. Really easy peasy, not even a chance to actually go through. And basically what they've said is, well, we got a process to follow, and this committee of Republicans told us that we shouldn't ban red flag laws, so we better keep them here. So what all these people are telling us is that they're strong on the Second Amendment, but when it comes to ending violations of the Second Amendment, they're gutless and absolutely worthless. And I would say they're a bigger part of the problem than the people who are obviously going out there saying, well, we need to repeal the Second Amendment. Because if your friends of the right to keep and bear arms are horrible, you've got no chance at all, I think.
Well, there's a couple of things that you guys talk about pretty consistently that I'd like you to expound on a little bit. And that's, the 10th Amendment Center, you're talking about putting power back in the hands of the state, resisting federal overreach. And a part of that means being willing to work with whoever you can in order to get legislation passed at the state level to combat federal overreach. And something I know I've heard you talk about many times is trying to work with people on what they're best at. So you think of, well, I'll work with the left on predictive policing, facial recognition, weed. I know you've said many times, hey, I wish everybody had the balls that the weed people have. And so you figure that the left will be good on those things. And if there's work to be done there, you'll coalition with the left. The reason why we're picking on Republicans is that and we're talking in huge generalities because we're just big collectivists here on the program, is that you expect
I'm
the
not
right
talking in generalities.
you expect the
all
right.
politicians are. First of all,
Wait, let me finish that thought really quick.
Evil, right? Let's just take that. And then once in a while, we get lucky and they do the right thing because they think it's in their best interest. I would actually rather have a spineless politician that changes with the wind rather than a John McCain who's got really, really strong principles, but those principles were about murdering people in other countries to supposedly protect you. So we have to remember that all this stuff that they tell us is for our safety is really just to control us. So I don't really think maybe there's a few exceptions. I wouldn't say blanket, but as a general rule, yes, I would say all politicians are horrible. Some of them can be good on one issue. And what you're getting at is let's find that common ground and work with them on that issue. We will work with the ACLU to restrict states and localities from doing mass warrantless facial recognition surveillance because they shouldn't be doing this. This is tracking and stalking people at all times. Predictive policing, using algorithms to figure out who might commit a crime. And this is dystopian garbage. Absolutely will work with them. But then they'll laugh at us. Oh, you're really into that healthcare freedom stuff. Ha, ha, ha. Really had an actual meeting at ACLU headquarters with Meharry and myself, literally, where they were like that. Oh, you guys are into that healthcare freedom and gun stuff too. Ha, ha, ha. Like they think it's funny. I'm like, okay, cool. Anyways, let's get to work on this anti-surveillance stuff. And then we'll do the same thing on the other side. The right tends to be really horrible on police state things. We can see how that's playing out when they are decades behind the left on refusing to participate in federal enforcement on the right to keep and bear arms. We can see how that police state addiction is a real problem on that. But we will absolutely work with them. And we find some issues where it does kind of cross the political spectrum, things like asset forfeiture. We're finding left and right now on board with ending that in many places. We're also finding that in some places on cannabis prohibition. For example, in Oklahoma a couple of years ago, this is as red as you can get, red of a red state as you can get. And they passed the most expansive, at least up to that point, medical marijuana program in history. But it had to go to the voters because the Republican legislators really weren't on board. But yes, I know I jumped in on that. I'm sorry. But really, I don't think any of these politicians are people that we should trust, but we can find ways to push them in areas that they have staked a claim to. Like if someone says they're a Second Amendment person, we better expose them or push them in a way to make them very popular on doing that. And the way that we can do that is literally to opt out and end and nullify this gun control that's happening right now, and more on the way.
So just for everybody listening at home, 7 minutes and 5 seconds later, yeah, I'm sorry I jumped in on that. So I was being sarcastic about being collectivists on this program. What I was trying to get at, I'm going to find the mute button for you. What I was trying to get at is that you try to work with people on what they're good at, but if a Democrat runs, when he's trying to get into office and he runs on a platform of, I'm against predictive policing, and then he gets into office and then he does that. He actually says, I'm willing to work with you on this bill because I'm against that. Then okay, more's the better. The problem is that you'll have a hard time finding any Republicans nationwide that'll come out and say, I'm against guns. Because that's the opposite of what they run on. They always run on pro-gun, pro-gun, pro-gun. But then when they actually get into office, you can't work with them because that's a campaign promise, right? I know, whether it's abortion, Planned Parenthood, whatever million different topics you want to bring up, it's good to run on, it's good to fundraise on, but when they actually get real bills in a state legislature to vote on, they don't do it.
Yeah, or they introduce a bunch of amendments to water it down. For example, there's a proposal from the Missouri Sheriff's Association on a bill, Second Amendment Preservation Act, similar to what was going on in Wyoming. This one already passed out of the state house by a vote of like 107 to 43. And as it stands today, or as of a couple of hours ago, it would ban enforcement of federal gun control, past, present, and future, and would also create an environment where even though they can't go after an individual officer who may have violated the act should it pass, they can go after an agency for hiring people on a consistent basis that does this stuff. So what does the Missouri Sheriff's Association want to do to this bill? They want to change the liability issues to be against the President of the United States, as if people can file a cause of action against the president while the local law enforcement are actually enforcing the federal gun control. They want to take a prohibition on federal gun control, all of it, and turn it into, well, we will stop enforcing stuff that doesn't come along from the federal government with what they call statutory authority. And that's a really fancy legal trick. Someone reading that might be like, oh, well, none of it really has proper authority. It's not authorized. But the fact of the matter is every piece of federal gun control, including bump stock Trump's ban of 2018, came under a statutory authority. This executive order claimed that they just needed to redefine a word that was in a previous act. I think it was the Gun Control Act of 1968. And so they always claim statutory authority. So what the Missouri Sheriff's Association is saying, we want to enforce all federal gun control. They can just claim anything, and we are fully on board with this. And this is the type of stuff that we're dealing with all the time. So they don't necessarily vote against it because that Second Amendment Preservation Act passed in the Wyoming Senate. It just doesn't preserve anything. So they love grandstanding and pretending that they're doing things that are good and really just hoping that the people are ignorant of this. And a lot of people are, unfortunately. So we do a lot of work to try to educate people on what some of this kind of really boring, garbage, dumb, legal, technical stuff does, because if no one knows what it actually does, then people can still continue thinking that all these people are pro Second Amendment or are good on the Constitution when they're really not.
On that note, guys, we're going to take a quick commercial break, but we'll be right back with Michael Boldin of the 10th Amendment Center right after this. Don't go away. Guys, welcome back to the show. We're still here with Michael Boldin of the 10th Amendment Center. Michael, something I want to lead in for the second segment is there seems like there's a lot of cognitive dissonance, specifically for Republicans nationwide, in that on the one hand, they're the party of backing the thin blue line. They support the police. They support the police unions. And yet, on the other hand, they don't seem to understand that it's that same law enforcement apparatus that will be enforcing all the federal overreach, that'll be enforcing all the laws that Democrat-controlled legislatures and presidents pass. And oh, by the way, is it really nullification if you're asking permission to do it?
Yes, big problem. Yes, big problem. No, it's 100% not nullification if you're waiting for permission. And really, that's what they're doing. Like in the Wyoming bill that I was describing, they're like the legislature already has the permission from the Supreme Court through the anti-commandeering to ban enforcement of any federal act. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to first be determined as unconstitutional. And in fact, Justice Samuel Alito in the 2018 anti-commandeering case specifically said, the federal government cannot require a state legislature to start or stop doing anything, even if that action conflicts with federal law. So it doesn't have to first have a determination of constitutionality. They can just say, we don't like this policy and we don't want our state participating. But yet they not only want one layer of permission from the attorney general, they want a second layer of permission from the governor and a third layer of permission from the governor if the governor determines things to be unconstitutional, like to then decide, well, should we continue enforcing this unconstitutional federal gun control because it might not be in the best interest of our state to stop? I mean, this is like 3 layers of permission, deferring to authority multiple times, authority that is probably really crappy on the Constitution and liberty, on the right to keep and bear arms, and on all kinds of other stuff. And it is a serious problem. And then in Missouri and elsewhere, deferring to whatever a law enforcement lobby groups. Now, I don't know if the individual law enforcement agents in Missouri are taking the same position, but 23 sheriffs said, kill this bill. We can't do our job if we don't have if we are banned from enforcing federal gun control across the board, we can't do our job. Well, you need a new job, dude, because you got to learn how to do it without violating people's rights. So no, it's not nullification if you're waiting for more permission. It's not nullification if you're not changing anything. And yeah, they piss me off.
Well, something that we did not talk about in the pre-show, by the way, that I'm kind of springing on you, is everybody's really hot and bothered about the prospect of vaccine passports. I'm sure you've seen this in the news. Allegedly, it hasn't happened as of this recording, but allegedly the Biden administration is looking at some type of national mandated vaccine passport plan, under the guise of, oh, this will help us reopen. Everyone has to get vaccinated. You'll have a little pass that says you're vaccinated, and then businesses can use that to determine whether or not you're allowed entry. Air travel obviously would be a big one because the feds control so much of travel and interstate commerce. Is this, and I'm just going to kind of give the floor to you on that to talk about your thoughts on a potential vaccine passport, but also the silver lining is this not exactly the type of line in the sand where nullification and states standing up to federal overreach, like this is a perfect opportunity to put that into practice?
I think what we miss oftentimes with nullification is that it doesn't start and get effective through state legislation. And I just want to kind of sidestep that question a little bit, because if we think about cannabis and we go back to 1996, passage of Prop 215 here in Southern California, in California, for the
Mm-hmm.
legalization of cannabis for medical purposes. People were buying, selling, consuming, and growing and owning and transporting this illegal plant before there was ever a state law. So really it
No.
starts with human action, and then the passage of the state law can actually help them out because you're removing a major enforcement layer. If the state and local law enforcement aren't participating in the enforcement, even if they just reduce it to some degree, it allows a foot in the door. And I believe in the long run, markets are more powerful than governments. But it is helpful to have that kind of 1-2 punch. Now, if we're talking about a vaccine passport, you could pass all the state laws you want. But if the general public wants to use it, that's what's going to happen. If the market says this is what we want, whether there's a mandate or if it's just business based or if it's some kind of corporate fascist garbage combination of the two, then that's what's going to happen. Now, you can also consider the Real ID Act. And I think some people, if they do this type of thing, might want to, especially for travel purposes, might want to implement such a thing on a Real ID driver's license card. Now, we're going to have to tell Republicans how much of a problem they are once again, because they were so on board with having basically a national ID, where the opposition to having the Real ID Act of 2005 was primarily led by organizations on the left like ACLU and an organization some years ago called Bill of Rights Defense Committee, which is a very progressive kind of Bill of Rights-y type of organization that is different now. But anyways, but the right was so on board with this because this is the way you were going to stop illegal immigration. You were going to stop terrorism. We have to have voter ID, and it was going to all be centralized, and all the states were going to have to follow the central government's rules on how to have an updated biometric capable driver's license. So you can think of how one thing that may have been passed 15, 16 years ago might be used in a bigger way today. That is a reminder that every power you give government today to do something that you like will be in the hands of someone in the future to do stuff that you don't like. So never, ever, ever give them more power.
Well, you won't get any argument from me on that. Yeah, right. So I want to follow up, taking one last swing, particularly at the Second Amendment gun aspect right of things. We live in a technologically wondrous age, and I'm getting at 3D printing. And with 3D printing, I know you just recently were doing content on supposed ghost guns. But the reason it popped into my mind because you were talking about the market is going to do what it wants, and you're talking about taking human action. And I feel like it's one of those things where once the lamp is open, the genie's out of the bottle. That's it. So 3D printing is here. And by the way, it's advancing all the time. Like I remember just a few years ago, it was you print a pistol that looks like a Nerf gun and it shoots once and explodes in your hand, and now they're printing AR-15s. And so surely, I guess what I'm getting at is that surely, the Fed, the powers that be, can look at that and say, well, wow, this exists. Our wishing it away is not going to make 3D printing go away. But they're only, and I guess I want to just like a quick rant here. This is the worst thing about government. It's the worst thing about the state. And I know that you'll sympathize with this. And it's that they only know one way of doing things, and it's coercion. They really only know one way of combating things they don't like, and that's an escalation of force. And while I'm very happy that we live in a time where things like 3D printing or maybe it's crypto or whatever, VPNs, anything you can do to protect your privacy, exchange goods and services without asking permission from the state. But I also always kind of take pause that but the state's not just going to say, oh, well, all shucks, and kick a rock down the road and walk away. I'm always worried about the ways that they're going to seek to escalate. Are there some things that you see on the horizon that give you pause and you're concerned that, well, yes, crypto exists, yes, 3D printing exists, but the war hasn't been won just yet?
Oh, I don't think it's even close to being one. And I am short-term very cynical. I'm long-term very positive and optimistic.
Okay.
I don't think we will see liberty in our own lifetime. But yet I spend 12 to 14 hours a day sometimes working on efforts to advance liberty today, even though I don't think it's going to happen in my life, because I believe that it's my moral duty. If we're going to get a little kind of sappy, I believe it's my moral duty, because I have this knowledge, to share it with as many people as possible as how to do things. 3D printing is a huge part of defending the right to keep and bear arms. If we think that, oh, they're not going to try to have a nationwide ban basically on all firearms at some point in the future, we should just stop participating. Like, literally, it's only going to keep getting worse. And 3D printing, and I mentioned in a recent Path to Liberty podcast talking about this as well. I know Sal the Agorist, if you guys follow him over on Twitter, posted a lot of great memes and stuff like that, but also runs a website called 3D Printer Go Burr with 3 R's. And for those of you who understand the joke with the Fed, this is amazing, because really you can nullify gun control on your own by printing. I don't know how to do it. I really need to, because if you're thinking about survival skills, we're not just talking about survival in a collapse, but survival against the most powerful, the largest government, the largest military empire in the history of the world, and it's not even close. Survival really means learning how to live more freely in a world that is not increasingly less free all around us. And I would actually make the case, and I go back to one of the founders, his name was John Dickinson, called the penman of the revolution, who would actually make the case that this is not a free country at all. Because what a free people is, according to Dickinson, are not the people who live under a government who has all kinds of power, but just doesn't use it against you right now. Like, they have all kinds of power to confiscate weapons, to monitor your activity, to stalk you, to just pick you up and throw you in a cage, whatever it may be, for all kinds of stuff. There's even a book that every person probably commits about 3 federal crimes per day. So they could do all kinds of stuff. And just because they aren't logistically capable of pulling it all off doesn't mean you're free. You're just lucky right now. According to Dickinson, people are free when they live in a scenario where those who could violate their rights are so limited and rejected and resisted at every turn that they're just not even capable of doing it if they want to. So I would make the case that living under the largest government ever, that is growing still, we are not a free people, and it's going to take actions of a free people, claiming our rights, as Thomas Jefferson put it, printing our own firearms, learning how to defend ourselves against surveillance, opting out of the Federal Reserve System through things like cryptocurrency, stuff that they can't confiscate. That's what it's going to take for a free people to exist in this country or anywhere.
You're the best, man.
I love you.
I love
No,
you
you
too,
are.
buddy.
3D Printer Go Burr is not my website, but it is cool.
No, I want to say, because this is something I've been criticized before in the past, is I'm very cynical too. I know you're shocked to hear that. But sometimes people will ask me, well, if you're so cynical and you feel like you're not going to have liberty in your lifetime, then why do you do what you do? Why do you do a show? Why do you write articles? Why do you do these things? And by the way, I loved your answer. You have a fantastic answer. My answer, I think I just put simply is I'm trying to build a community. I feel like if there's certain things that that are outside of my control, and the world goes a certain direction that I don't agree with, then at the very least I will have reached like-minded people and we will have built some kind of a community, whether it's right here in Nashville where I'm recording this, or whether it's us all over Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and we're spread out all over the country or the world. Is that it's it's not just having strength in numbers, and that doesn't necessarily have to mean like you're forming a militia to go march anywhere. It could just be strength in numbers and being able to talk to people who
Yep.
agree with you on these things, and that you know that you're not alone out there. So I'm all about building the community, but Michael, we're running out of time. Where can people go to support you in the 10th Amendment Center?
They can just stop right over here anytime. I live in
Oh,
Little
perfect.
Tokyo, and
Awesome.
we can all go eat. No, it's 10thamendmentcenter.com or 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. You already pulled up both those links at the beginning. I appreciate you mentioning it. And I think we actually have kind of the same answer, but in different words as to why we do this stuff. Because we're trying to do something not just for today, but for the people that we can connect with. But maybe there's a chance in the future. And if no one does anything today, then those people alive in 500 years, they're not going to have anything to build on. So let's set the foundation, as Jeff Dice put it in an annual event that Mises did here in Los Angeles in, I guess, October 2019. Now we can skip 2020, right? He basically said, look, brick by brick, person by person, that's how we build the foundation for liberty. And I think he's absolutely correct. We don't have the capability of the mainstream media or the education system, the government backed and government run education system. So we got to scrap. We got to be scrappy, and we got to be smart, and we got to be consistent, and we got to be persistent, and keep pushing forward. I want us to do one more Thomas Jefferson citation. He wrote in a letter to Reverend Charles Clay in 1790 that the ground of liberty is to be gained by inches. And I think he's smarter than me, and I'm going to just run with that. And he went on by saying, he's like, even good people need to learn how liberty is in their best interest. And that's my paraphrase, but specifically the ground of liberty is to be gained by inches, because it takes time to teach people what's best for them. And what's best for people is to be able to have more freedom.
Well, that's just the big difference between me and Jeff Dice, is that he has all those eloquent sayings, and I just tell people to visit euthanasia.com to get the information they need to make the right choice for them. Michael, we're going to get you out of here on this one. Are you ready?
I'm doing the official late night hug.
All right. If you have two different lasagnas and you stack one of the lasagnas on top of the other, is it still two lasagnas or just a lasagna?
Well, the fact of the matter is that they're just going to be a meal, because they're not going to last long on that plate, and they'll just be in my belly as one mash of a giant lasagna.
I feel like by that logic, then what you're saying is it's just a lasagna then.
I mean, that's what I'm saying, but I'm
Okay.
going to eat it so quickly that no one's going to know.
Okay. Wow. Well, all right then. I just want to let you know, by the way, before we wrap up, that I thought about doing the switcheroo on you, of doing the opposite, where what if you have a single lasagna and you slice it horizontally? Does that now become two lasagnas or two pieces of the original
No, you
lasagna?
have two pieces of lasagna.
All right.
What's your answer?
Yes.
I mean, you are the authority on all kind of food combination things.
Yeah.
I just defer to you. So when people ask me, he's like, well, is this really a soup or is it a dipping sauce? I'm like, I don't actually know, but I reference the late night show over with Alan Mosley. It's too late and it's not soup.
First of all, cereal is soup. And second of all, I don't know if you saw the episode from a couple of weeks ago. I asked these questions to get an in earnest answer from all of my guests. And Tom Woods not only told me the incorrect answer, that it's not soup, cereal is a separate category, but his actual answer was, you know how I know, Alan? Because you're just bullshitting everyone. So I told him when I publish my first book, I'm going to have on the cover, "You're just bullshitting everyone, -- Tom Woods."
That should be the title.
Well, far be it from me to argue with that. Michael Boldin, thanks so much, buddy. I feel like you should just do this every week.
Yes, let's do this every week.
All right, you're going to just be the new producer. How about that?
Well, as most people are unaware, my production skills for the setup of this interview are pretty crappy. So if you want to go through an extra half hour, 45 minutes for every interview, Alan, I'm on board.
Yeah, you know what I do? I do want I do want to do that. Guys, we
It's
will
just
be
for the love of the game.
what a great line to end the segment on, just by the way. Guys, we will be right back to wrap up the show after this. Don't go away. Hi guys, it's Alan here, and I want to take a moment to let you know about one of our supporters who started a new business. Laura Moreau sells 50 different health and wellness all-natural products, from weight loss, supplements, energy enhancers, body toning, longer and stronger hair, and so much more. Do you like coffee? Well, they even have coffee that'll help you drop some pounds, and who doesn't want to drop a few pounds? Go check her out at her online store at lauramoreau.itworks.com today. That's lauramoreau.itworks.com. Like our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/AlanMosleyTV. You can follow me on Twitter. That's twitter.com/AlanMosleyTV. Subscribe to our YouTube page. It's youtube.com/AlanMosleyTV. That got away from me there a couple of times because our dear friend Michael Boldin, when he gets going, he gets going. And I actually had a message from him already before I could even finish the finale of the show, saying that he really enjoyed it because he felt like he could just come on here and run his mouth, which is exactly what we love to do on this show. By the way, guys, we are now on Anchor FM, which is all the traditional podcast platforms, Spotify, a bajillion other ones I can't remember, Google Podcasts, I think iTunes is on the way. Also, you can find us again on Odyssey. We're right there. You can follow us on Odyssey if you're a anti-YouTube person. Just search It's Too Late with Alan Mosley or Alan Mosley TV. And there you go. So, guys, thank you so much, and we will see you next week.